Reconciliation with Indigenous people is happening all across Canada, including here in the Yukon. Our schools sit on the traditional territories of Yukon First Nations people. And so for our reconciliation efforts, it's important that we have an education system that's culturally inclusive.
Yukon schools sit on the traditional territories of 14 First Nations that fall within 8 language groups.
Yukon students come from very cultural and diverse backgrounds. When students see themselves reflected in their own schools, students and families feel a part of the school. And when students have that opportunity to learn and understand the language, culture, and history of their own peers, it enriches their own learning.
Yukon schools are starting to use British Columbia's new school curriculum with adaptations to fit the Yukon context. One of the main ways we are adapting the curriculum is by integrating Yukon First Nations language, culture, history, and ways of knowing and doing in all subject areas and at all grade levels.
We're currently making adaptations to the school curriculum to create space for the schools to work with their local First Nation to incorporate their language, culture, and history, knowledge and perspectives into class programming. The differing culture and traditions of each of the Yukon First Nations means this will look different in each of our schools.
The dance group at Elijah Smith Elementary School is a way that schools are connecting students with Yukon First Nations culture.
So our dance group is called Chundai Kanata, which means flying eagle dancers. When they see and take pride in their identity and they get to practice their culture and hear their language, it gives them that sense of pride and gets their basic needs met so that they're available for learning.
I like dancing because it makes me feel me, and I would like to bring it back.
I like doing it because it has my culture, and I like doing pretty much anything that's has my culture in it. So.
I don't know, because I like to talk to my friends and listen and learn more about old cultures and stuff like that.
It often gives people a sense of belonging, even if they aren't First Nations, because they make personal connections. It often brings up questions about their identity and they want to learn about themselves. I've had one dancer that drew a connection between what happened with the Irish people in Europe and what happened with the First Nations people in Canada and the colonization of both. And it was pretty neat to see him making that type of deep personal connection.
They don't necessarily have to be First Nation to learn how to do what we used to do.
At Holy Family Elementary School's annual bison hunt camp, grade 6 students are learning on the land, but also about the history of the area, the traditional territory of the First Nations they are camping on, and the values and respect for the area that First Nations people have.
Oftentimes, our Yukon First Nations ways of knowing and doing is an add-on. They're only a small part of these hunts. But what I like about the way I'm working with Terry and Dawn today is that it's built right in, it's infused in, and it's woven in throughout the whole thing. So for example, if there's a lesson on building little mini survival kits and fire kits, I gave a little mini lesson on our traditional ways of making fire using flint, steel, and chaga. Then hopefully that starts to permeate what our goal in education is that it's just woven right into our whole curriculum.
One of the things George has taught us is that within different First Nations groups, there's different stories, there's different traditions. So it's important to know and understand from the different First Nations as well.
And I think one of the foundations of being able to do that is building relationships. Part of that, the teacher for this camp had already talked to the 4 different First Nations. He was aware that there's 4 different First Nations traditional territory he was on, and I contacted all 4 of them as well. In some cases, they even gave us letters of permission or acknowledgement that we were here, kind of thing, and they supported our activities.
At Elijah Smith Elementary School, grade 6 teacher Miss Fairburn is finding ways to embed Yukon First Nations content and perspectives into her regular class programming.
We teach in social studies ancient civilizations. And one of the big ideas is the rise of civilizations around rivers. And that also becomes this perfect opportunity to to talk about the way traditionally and to this day rivers are used as waterways and means of life for Indigenous people here in the Yukon.
While many schools are already doing a great job, there is still a lot of work to do to make sure we are achieving our goal.
Our curriculum gives us a great opportunity to take action on reconciliation, to embed Yukon First Nations language, culture, history, and ways of knowing and doing into all our schools.
And it's not one way of knowing and doing replacing the other one, it's those two working together. And our elders speak very clearly of that in the time that we're in. So it's not an add-on, it's not something that's an afterthought. It's nothing that's tokenistic, it's just woven throughout, and it's truly working together.